Here. Wondering how many books will be here because kind of holiday.
Yes, but the gold holiday for sure. What is it, jumping up the day on? I don't know, you should put up the day on. It's got a bit of a mind of its own. We just had a reminder and put you some people on here. Thank you, Ann. And it's the headquarters. Good morning. Good morning. I didn't have any work. Yeah. No problem. Thinking of being Columbus Day. Oh, yeah, maybe it's not. But it's right. Hey, Ruth. You're muted. Looks like she's in diagram. Yeah. Oh, in the trumpets. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying.
Well, they didn't send out the link and it wasn't on the
Yeah,
news.
that's good. Like, we're just here, yeah. No, like, yeah, we have like, it's Friday night, Saturday night, and yesterday, we saw that chance. Took her for half dinner. My parents came, they like wanted to be with it and all that stuff. It was fun, but like, we got back last night, at, like 9. I need a weekend. I know, like Sunday night, and I'm like, I'm exhausted. I know, but it was fun. Well, that's good. How are you, Ruth?
I'm fine. I'm sorry we're late. I couldn't find the link and then they sent it. But I don't know if how many people are there.
Yeah, so she's got any questions other than that about. Yeah. Yeah, I forgot. When I pulled in the parking lot, I was like, yeah. Then I was like, please stop. Is it open? Yeah, I was like, did I miss something? 'Cause it happened. Yeah, well, it's closed for some of these days, like, we're always. Yeah, but yeah, exactly. The office. You didn't find out last week, but they're gonna get told to touch it. So, yeah, they just went out wireless and then you last week, yeah. I guess seller financing. That's in like door. And. Yeah, not really busy. I don't know why. Yeah, really, nobody wants to. But it's kind of sit there like that. I guess there's not, yeah. I can answer questions. Yeah. Make books. So can I still come to book club if I didn't think of okay, good. But I didn't think I was gonna get it. This is the third month where I've been wanting to go, so I'm not going to go. I thought ready to leave those. But is that what she said? Yeah. She well, I was the company I did it last time, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do that. That was I can't finally agree with all day. It's like I'm gonna do that. This one is like, it's an LO meeting at like 2:30. And then something and a half hour. It's like. What be more happy? I know, I was like, I'm thinking this stuff. I picked you all last time. Every other semester. Yeah, and I was like, why? All of a sudden, it's like a company thing, it's like the same day. Yeah, it was like, this is the second Wednesday, like, your name now, James, could maybe change it. Yeah, we were there first. Exactly. So I was like, oh. Yeah, some people never like Dallas. I mean, I do like reading. But, and I read the last book, I didn't finish it in time for both of them, I didn't finish it, who was it? Was that what? Who was it? What do you think of it? Yeah. Really like that ending. Like, I felt like it built up and was like kept my interest, but then I was let down a little bit by the end. Yeah, like, how likely is this when it's literally gonna look that much like either percent of people? Yeah, like I'm thinking like. It was, I don't know. Like my brain's going on with something, but then I was like, I don't know, I just felt like it was a little bit of, okay. I also thought the weird, I randomly had a twin over in Germany was so weird. Oh, yeah, that was the other time. Yeah. But because you felt alone growing up, like that's what I think they were. Because she's always like through the book, they always have this like she felt. Like that's fine, but the whole I speak German because I lived there for 5 seconds and had it. Like all when you were 2 years old. Yeah, exactly, like I thought that was not a very good explanation for why she was speaking German. No, not at all. I thought that would be something cooler. So yeah, I felt like that, like it kind of built up to where I was like, oh, this is it, like it kept me going, and then I was like, oh. Yeah, I'm with you. Okay.
I also thought her hatred of real life was kind of unconventional.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna show that she, I mean, I guess she did have a bad experience, but I thought it was gonna show that she was pregnant or something, you know what I mean? Like, I thought it was gonna be like her,
Like more justified.
yes, like, and then I was, it wasn't.
Unsatisfactory.
Yeah, that's what I felt like, that everything that quote came together at the end just didn't come together that way.
I like to be like writing, you know, I'm happy for, yeah. Well, small crowd today, friends, so I guess we'll ask, do you guys have any questions? And it's just Ruth and Sandy, is there anything that y'all wanna talk about? Can you guys hear us?
We can hardly hear you. We're very, like you're in a different room somewhere.
Can y'all hear us now? I don't think we were. I don't even hear.
Maybe you should move closer to the middle of the room.
Well, can we not hear them? Ruth, are you talking?
Here.
Yes,
Maybe
I'm
we can't
talking.
hear.
Let's see
No?
what happened here.
Yes,
Yes, I'm talking, but you sound like you're so far away. Can you hear me?
Can y'all hear us now?
Can you hear me?
User error.
I think our speakers were muted, because I was like, Ruth's little box is lighting up, but I don't hear anything.
Okay. Much better. Well, we were saying, do y'all, since it's kind of a smaller group, do y'all have any questions? Or anything going on that y'all wanna talk about?
I know I've talked to both of you this weekend. I've got some buyers with a VA loan that have put offers on 2 houses. So I know that can be a little complicated, but I know they have due diligence on both. So I know if somehow they ended up under contract with both, which that wouldn't happen, we could cancel because they have due diligence. But they haven't been accepted for either one yet, but they have 2 offers out. That's my first time having 2 offers out at the same time.
Yeah, and that's fine as long as they've got the earnest money to do that twice.
They do, but they haven't gone binding yet either, and I've got it
Yeah.
for money to be due 3 days after binding.
Okay. Well, fingers crossed that at least one gets accepted.
Thank you. Yes, fingers crossed, because we've seen probably 40 some houses and they want to see 4 more today. Even with the 2 offers out.
Are these the ones we talked about, Sandy?
They are, Erin, and thank you both so much for your answers to my questions this weekend.
Get them under contract.
I'm curious, what was your answer as far as like the timeline for financing contingency for VA?
Well, I told her, I was like, if it was us, it's the same as everything else. There's no difference for finances for us. But we've got, I mean, our underwriters are certified, we've got the VA, FHA, so it's our same underwriting team. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the only real, wild card timeline wise for VA is the appraisal. But that doesn't, from lender to lender, we all have to use the VA appraisal company or team.
Yeah.
So you're ordering it through VA, so so that doesn't matter which lender they're with,
Okay.
it's always a crapshoot in the terms of timing, because it's going to the same place and they won't, like with our appraisal team, we can say, hey, we need it back, by Thursday.
Mhm.
And if it's, it might be a rush fee or this or that, but like they can get it done.
Mhm.
Whereas the VA, you are not telling them when you need it back, you're just ordering it and then they're just processing it. So there's no like, hey, I need this back by the 15th. They're like, maybe.
But that's okay, because it's the actual contingency, right?
Yes, for the, exactly.
That's less stressful.
So, but financing, so like for her, I was like, well, they're using Navy Federal originally, I was like 14 days maybe. Matt was like maybe 18, so, you know, but they don't work as fast.
Yeah.
So, but if it's us, I mean, it's no different, we can do 7 days, we can pre-underwrite that and not take one.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what do y'all see for like the repair value to put in there?
So we talked about that too, I said, I see around $500 very commonly.
Okay.
I mean, as far as advising what you should put in there, I mean, I guess because I see that a lot, it seems reasonable. But you know, back in the day when there's multiple offers and you're coming in with the VA, which already might be not as appealing as conventional, the lower the number, the better, because basically you're saying the seller, don't do this, they don't want to do it. But
Yeah, I also kind of feel like a lot of listing agents maybe don't even look at the whole thing, whole exhibit, yeah. So I almost feel like that's not a huge factor as far as getting it accepted, I mean, good ones a lot.
Yeah, it
see the
depends on
whole
the
thing,
listing, yeah.
But I think a lot of them look at the first page and call it a day. Maybe they would look at the second page, because that's where the financing contingency used to live. But, well, now the actual time frame is on the first page, they moved that either January or May. But it used to live on the second page, so maybe they'll look there, but yeah, I had said anyone, I see like 500 and 1,500, so I was curious if we were seeing the same thing, or I think that's pretty close, or not. Are there multiple offers on this property, Sandy?
The first property, not so much multiple offer. There was another offer, but they're not even moving forward with that one. The thing that's frustrating about the first offer, and my clients may end up walking away from it, is that we put it in. Sorry, my dog's barking, so I'm trying to walk away from her.
That's okay.
The first one is that the frustrating part was that we submitted the offer Saturday morning and asked for them to respond by noon yesterday, and or maybe it was, I don't know, maybe it's Friday, maybe we submitted Friday, I don't know, the days are all blurring together. Whatever it was, we asked for 24 hours, and then the listing agent got back and said, oh, we've got a bunch of showings this weekend, so my seller really wants to let it ride out. And I was like, okay, well, that's fine. You know, and of course, if we end up going with that one, we'll have to amend the due date and all that. But my clients they're living in a hotel right now. They really want to know where they're going. That's why. So yesterday we went shopping all day and found another house. And now I think they're thinking, even if this house comes back and says, oh yeah, we'll counter your offer, they're kind of moving on in their heads. So that was, you know, so the listing agent and the seller had a bird in hand, right, with our contract, ready to move forward, but they wanted to keep fishing, and now they may lose everything.
Yeah. I might be, I think a lot of times sellers still think the market is what it was 6 months ago, right? Like they're always a little bit behind. And I think even 6 months ago, there were still more multiple offers than we're seeing today.
And this one's this was on the market last year and was withdrawn, and it's on the market again, and it's been on the market for about a month. They did have offers, but it fell through. So you would think they would have jumped on our offer.
Yeah.
So
Sounds
now
like the seller's probably super picky and maybe hard to work with.
maybe, but I don't know. But I mean, pretty much now, if this second offer, you know, we're not going to let go of the first one until we know that we've got the second one, but they're kind of leaning towards that one now. And actually, we're still shopping today. So I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody please accept their offer. I'm exhausted.
I don't blame you.
That's funny.
What price point are they in?
They're in the 400 to 600 range, but it depends on the house. Like if it's, you know, and they want to put a decent amount down, but they want to build a pool. And if it's a house that needs work, you know, they're trying to factor all that into their price point and that's why when I was asking you about how much they put down last night, you know, they're thinking they may hold cash back because of the things they want to do to the house. So they may want to put less down now because of VA loan, so they can, you know, they could go all the way to zero, right? They're not going to go that far, but they, you know, depends on how turnkey the house is. And some of the ones they're looking at, they'd need to redo the kitchen. They'd do a bunch of things to it because they're older houses. So,
Yeah. Well, something you said came up with a question for me. So what is something, because they want a pool, what is super important that
a survey,
you
a survey.
offer? Yes.
Survey.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked about that from the minute I met them. I was like, you want to build a pool, you're going to need to order a survey.
Yeah, but also you might want to put a contingency into your contract. Because if they order a survey, they get it back and there's not a title issue, they just can't build a pool. That's not means to get out of the contract. So if
Okay.
their hard line is I need a pool, then you might want to put a contingency into an offer that basically says this contract is contingent upon buyer obtaining a survey and survey showing that there is enough room to put whatever size pool that's important to them, or a pool if they don't really care what size, but that way they would have an out if they learn that they in fact cannot build a pool.
Well, one of the houses, the house that they're probably not going to go with now, actually has a filled-in pool. So that one probably is not as big a deal. But the one we just wrote the contract on last night, I did not write that contingency. How could I fix that at this point?
So if they haven't accepted it, you could withdraw the offer, rewrite it, resubmit it. I don't know if that is worth it to do to you, because you can always withdraw an offer until it's accepted.
Sure.
As soon as it's accepted, then obviously you have to terminate it. But and I don't know what the other listing agent is like. You could call them and say, hey, my people really want to put a pool in. I need to add a stipulation. You want me to withdraw the offer or can we amend it? But then there's an element of trust there, which I don't really operate from a place of trust when it comes to contracts. So the cleanest way to do it is to withdraw it, rewrite it, resubmit it. But I don't know if that would hurt your chances of it getting accepted. And so that's kind of a risk that you have to weigh out with your buyer is, hey, we can get a survey. If it shows that you can't put a pool in as it stands right now, it's not a way to get out of the contract. The easiest way to fix it is to withdraw, rewrite, resubmit.
If they counter, could we counter with that stip in the counter?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So maybe I'll let it ride for now and see if they count. Yeah, we'll see. Because I guess if they sign it though, as is, then we're kind of in. But then we can still potentially.
Can they do it in due diligence?
So you could do an amendment in due diligence and submit it then too.
Okay, that's a good idea. Okay.
But yeah, the counter, probably if you're not gonna touch it now, the first place I would fix it is if they counter, then you can just counter back.
Sure.
Or you can just wait and try to do it during due diligence. The reason the counter is a little bit better is because that's in your contract from the get-go, because the chance of you getting a survey back to review it in the due diligence time period is almost zero. So you want to make sure that you give enough time for your contract. You might want to call a surveyor to see how long they need to complete a survey of that general size lot in that area, whatever county it's in, because they're kind of running a little bit.
Could she add the stip during due diligence?
That's what I'm wondering.
Like on an ATAG, like instead of whatever, if they ordered a survey but it's not gonna be back, could she add the stip on an ATAG and just say, hey, we're adding this in because the survey's not gonna be back, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, absolutely. But the risk there is if they say no and they don't sign your ATAC or they don't sign an amendment during the due diligence period, you can either take the risk and maybe not be able to put the pool in, or you can terminate the contract. So that's why putting it in the counter is a little bit better, because that way it exists before you're into the deal a little bit. But if that doesn't work, there's not a counter, you can of course do it during the due diligence period. It's just if they won't sign it, then it becomes, do we take the risk or do we terminate the contract?
Right. I guess we could terminate the contract and then rewrite it with the stip in, even at that point, if there are any other offers that have come in.
Yeah.
I know. I'm just trying to. She's already sent it over to her clients, and I'm like, okay, now if I rewrite it and send it over, and it becomes a big cluster.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. So maybe keep your fingers crossed they counter. But if not, just do it during due diligence, and if they won't, then they'll just have to decide then.
Yeah, because either way, if they don't want it, if they can't do, if they don't wanna take the risk.
Then they have the chance to walk away, right?
Yeah,
I know,
there's
I-
not a chance, yeah.
I do have 8 days of due diligence in there, and I know surveyors are taking a long time. Obviously, I don't want to order a survey until we know that they actually are getting the house.
Right,
Doesn't
but
make
you
any
can still
sense.
call a survey company and say, hey, what kind of time frame do you need to do a
Yeah.
survey on a quarter of an acre lot in Forsyth County? And they might say, we can book you 2.5 weeks out, and then okay, that's gonna be nowhere near due diligence. Or they might say, we would book you 10 days out, but if you pay a rush fee, we can get it done in 5 days. And you say, okay, then that's a good survey company that you wanna go with, because they can get it done during due diligence, and then you don't even really need to add a stay.
Right.
You might
right.
still add it if they start feeling like they're delayed, or say, hey, we didn't make it out when we were supposed to, yada, yada. But that way you at least have a time frame that you can tell your clients too.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Is there anything crazy going on right now? Nothing, normal life, normal life
Normal
stuff. Fair enough. Well, what I've been seeing a lot lately, and I feel like y'all have all heard me talk about this, but I'm still seeing name issues. Meaning names not matching IDs, money not coming from the right place, sellers wanting money to go to another name kind of thing. Like I had a closing last week where this sweet couple, they just got married. Well, I don't know when they got married, but recently enough to where her name was not changed. But it was a cash closing. So there was no lender to have really verified what her name is. So the whole transaction, it was Ashley Connor. And then they show up for closing and her ID is Ashley Nance. And they were young and, we got it fixed, but just know that what matters is the name on the ID. It doesn't matter that you got married and you want to change your name one day. It's not your name yet. Getting married doesn't change your name. You have to go legally change your name. So same thing with getting a divorce. If your ID still has your ex's name on it, I'm sorry, but that's still your name. You have to actively legally change your name for us to use the new name. So ask those questions, and I always advise agents to get a copy of their client's ID ahead of time. You wanna know who you're dealing with anyway, right? So from a safety perspective, having the ID is really a good thing for you. But also it's helpful to avoid last minute changes. Because luckily, since it was cash, I just went and reprinted all of our documents. We had to order a name search on the buyer, because we still have to do name searches on buyers. And luckily, that came back quickly, and it only delayed the closing maybe by like 15 minutes or so. But if there had been a lender who maybe is not super responsive, maybe they're a lender out in California and you've got a 10 a.m. closing. They're not even open yet. They're not answering the phone to fix documents to send them to me. Because unfortunately, not all lenders get IDs. Ombra does, because they do the job.
Always.
And they should, because that makes a lot of sense to do that. But a lot of lenders don't. So whether you represent by, right?
Yeah, like, it's just more work for you as a lender. Like, why you wouldn't do it so that you know that everything you're doing is right from the get-go is beyond me. So we can't even submit a file without it. And it makes sense.
And I support that policy so much, because it makes my life so much easier. But just little things like that can really delay a closing, or you have a seller who, they got married, and so you didn't check their ID, and they show up to closing, and she was on title as Ashley Nance. She shows up and her name's Ashley Connor, and I'm like, who are you? And so, oh, I got married, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes these people will be nice and bring their marriage certificate because they're prepared, and that's really helpful. But what's more helpful is if we get the ID ahead of time and we can say, hey, I see you're on title as Ashley Nance, your ID says Ashley Connor. Did you get married, divorced, have a legal name change? And then can send the paperwork, so when you show up to sign, everything is ready to go. And part of our goal is not to get people in and out and rush people, but nobody wants to sit at the closing table, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for me to bring in paperwork to sign. That's not what anybody wants to do. So it's helpful for your clients and you, and it's more efficient when I have everything totally ready to go, because I've had all the information to be able to do that. from the get-go. So get those IDs, pass them on. Really, the only two reasons we ask for them before closing is to verify how names are spelled, and then also to make sure they're not expired. That same closing, these people crack me up, because we had actually talked, we got the husband's ID ahead of time, and that was good, and then the wife, like, wasn't sending the ID, and so we called, and we're like, I guess it's difficult to send it, can you just read us the name as it appears on her ID? And I tell you, the man read out the name exactly as we had it, but he knew that her ID didn't have that name, so I don't know what they were trying to do. But the seller, his ID was expired, it expired like a week before. So that was something where we could say, hey, thank you so much for sending, but it looks like your ID expired last week. Please make sure you update it or bring like a current passport to closing. Because that would be a problem, because we can't use an expired ID. And a lot of people think that's frustrating, because they're like, you can see that it's clearly me. It's not current, therefore it doesn't really exist. So making sure that it's current is a big deal too. And y'all check on that too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's really helpful that you do that.
Yeah,
Again,
yeah,
not everyone does.
yeah, we definitely do that. I mean, even for the credit report, because if the credit report is pulled on a different name, we have to re-pull it. So, you know, if in her instance, if it's coming in with a different last name on the actual, the legal name, we would have to go back. I mean, that it's not even just documents at that point, it's going back, re-pulling credit under the correct name. The underwriter has to re-review the file. I mean, it would be a pain. That's why we're always getting IDs at the front end.
And that's the pushback that we get for lenders who don't do that. Because they say, but we've already run credit under the other name, can't you just use that? And we represent the lender, so my answer to that is, if that's what you guys want to do, that's fine, but if you go to foreclose, that person does not exist. So you might have some trouble foreclosing on a ghost. If that's the risk you wanna take, fine, I'll get a name affidavit signed, you're gonna email me saying that's what you want, but it's not smart. Because again, the lender's entire two reasons for doing the loan is, one, they're making money off the interest. And two, if you don't pay it, they can foreclose and take the house. But if you take away the possibility of foreclosure, nobody's gonna lend money. You know, they need that right. So having it set up is important. That always makes me laugh. And they're like, can't you just use that? And I'm like, I mean, yeah, but why do you want that? Like, why didn't you just do it right from the beginning? And I think pulling credit, sometimes a lot of lenders will say it'll delay closing by like days with the nets.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like of us, we're all local, it would probably delay it a day, you know, and if you've got a lender who's not local and they're not just gonna drop everything and do it. I mean, it could be the same day, if you had a morning closing, we had to go to afternoon, but I mean, it's tough. Yeah.
And I think that's why some lenders don't wanna do that, is because they don't want the buyers calling, yelling at them. for
Maybe.
Using the wrong name.
And I would say too, like, I know you guys said like a buyer info sheet and stuff. As agents, really, really encourage your clients to fill those out and send them back into the closing attorney quickly. Because I've had closings where everything on our side is fine, but it's like the attorney, like the buyer maybe wasn't really responsive and it was a struggle, but we're done with the loan, but the attorney is still missing stuff from that buyer. Cause I mean, you guys need to be able to do your name searches and do whatever it is that you do. I don't know all that you do, but I know you have a process too, and I've had it where they're like, well, we haven't gotten the thing, and I'm on the phone to the buyer, like, you need to fill this out, you need to send this in, so. Just know that both the lender and the attorney are asking your buyers for stuff, and your sellers probably
The
from
seller.
the
And that's
attorney.
the bigger hole in
Yeah.
that for us. So like
Okay.
a buyer info sheet.
And it could have been a seller info sheet
It's
too
probably a
sometimes,
seller info
but,
sheet, because we can't order a payoff unless the seller tells us the payoff information. So the security deed that gets reported doesn't tell me what your loan number is. And it doesn't necessarily tell me who your servicer is. So the seller has to give us the tools to order the payoff. A lot of times the CAD doesn't have all the HOA information, but our seller info sheet does. So to be able to order the HOA closing letter. But sometimes I will say, as far as like buyer info goes, there are some HOAs that like refuse to provide the letter until the buyer fills out an HOA form. I wouldn't say that's common, but I've seen it a few times, and so sometimes we'll say, well, we can't give you the letter because the buyer hasn't filled out the paperwork for the HOA to provide the letter. And so that can happen. And what our info sheet for the buyer does have, that can be a little bit of a hurdle both for us and the lender, is whether the buyer's coming. If your buyer can't come to closing and they want to try to do a power of attorney or a mail out, telling us the morning of closing is not the way to do it. Now, if they get in like a horrible accident, their flight gets canceled, it's an emergency, of course, we're gonna do everything we can to work around that, so don't think it's an automatic no. But if you know they're going on vacation and are not gonna be there, tell us ahead of time, because for us to put a power of attorney together or to set up a mail out, we can probably do same day, next day. But a lot of times lenders need to approve the power of attorney. They need to run all that through underwriting. So to ask them to do that like in 30 seconds is not always gonna work out.
And be aware, power of attorneys, they've cracked down in the last year or so on the reasons for power of attorney. So if your client just has a trip planned, that's not an okay reason. The power of attorney from the lender side will be denied. So they're gonna have to do a mail away or something like that, or sign early, or do something different, or the closing needs to not be scheduled when they know they're going to be, in Italy on vacay. So just know that for power of attorney, obviously, if they live out of state and it's a hardship to get here, that's a valid reason. If it's a work trip that they can't move, that's a valid reason. Obviously, if someone's ill, those kinds of things. But if it's just like, hey, we're taking the kids to Disney World that week, so we're not gonna be there, that doesn't fly for power of attorney. So they want a real reason. They want the lender wants every buyer, if possible, to go in person. So they really want to make sure that it's a reason, like it's a true hardship, or they are unavailable due to work reasons. I mean, if you've got a client, they're a surgeon, they're like, I have surgery to that also applies. So, really work reasons that they can't get out of, or, distance reasons are the main ones. So just kind of keep that in the back of your head if your client does say, well, we're gonna be, out visiting, whatever. Hey, let's look and see if we can move the date first, or if they can do a mail away or something.
We're talking about that before you put an offer in.
Yes,
Right,
ideally.
say, hey, do you have any vacations coming up? Because most lenders really want you to be at the closing, so let's plan our closing date for when you guys can both be there. Like having that conversation before you put in an offer is gonna alleviate a lot of that. And just to be clear, what Erin's talking about is for a buyer loan power of attorney. For a seller, I don't care what their reason is. They might wanna go and take days. Yeah, and seller power of attorneys, we don't have to run by the lender because they don't care about it at all. It's really just the buyer. But we don't care the reason. It's really just if the lender is gonna approve it for their reasons or not. So a good idea to call your loan officer if something comes up. Hey, my guy wants a power of attorney because X, Y, Z. Is that feasible or not? And then you can kind of get a quick answer before you run the whole thing through underwriting, and it might be more efficient to call and ask that
And those
question.
are like Fannie Freddie guidelines on power of attorney, so don't think we're just being like mean. Everything that we do underwriting wise is based on what those investor guidelines are gonna be. We don't want to make extra work, so we really have very, very few overlays in general, so, but yeah, that was a Fannie Freddie.
And who can sign as attorney, in fact, is also, legally, any adult over the age of 18, incredibly broad. But if you're talking about a loan buyer, then I think it's really just either an attorney or a family member, right? Those are like the two categories. And definitely not a teacher.
It can be a friend.
It can be a friend.
Yeah, but I think sometimes if they're not related and it's not like an attorney or something, they may ask for, either an LOX, which is a letter of explanation, just, telling us who this person is and, hey, we've been friends for 10 years, blah, 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 they live in Atlanta. We live in Texas, we're not, what, that's fine.
Okay.
So it's just, yeah.
Someone.
They don't want you to just go find someone, at the forum and be like, hey, will you sign for me?
Yeah. So that, another thing to keep in mind, if that comes up, is who can do it as well. Also, and I know y'all have heard me say this a million times too, but if there's a power of attorney, the actual principal, so like the actual buyer, the actual seller, has to be available to do an alive and well phone call. So if it's, hey, we're not gonna.
I didn't get that.
Really?
No, like if my buyer has a power of attorney, y'all call them?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
Makes
and the reason is that a power of attorney is only valid if the human is alive. So theoretically, if you were like, I'm flying to Italy on Wednesday, my closing's Friday, if your plane crashes on the way to Italy on Wednesday, your attorney in fact cannot sign for you on Friday, because you're dead. So that is something that we have to do, and that comes up a lot when it is, I'm vacationing, and okay, your closing is at 9 AM, but that's, you know, whatever Italy time, or maybe your closing's at 4, and that's 3 o'clock in the morning in Italy, I don't wanna wake up to do. Tough stuff, you need to wake up, we have to verify.
So is it you're calling like at the time of the closing?
We can talk to them between
day of?
9 AM and the time of closing,
Okay.
so it just, you know, but if you're somewhere. You know, it's like, so if there's somewhere where timing is important and it's gonna be 2 o'clock in the morning at 9 AM here, then you might wanna try to schedule an afternoon closing, because it gives them a couple hours to wake up to be able to talk to us. So that's something to think through as far as where they are, because people get kind of cranky when they're, you know, they don't wanna wake up in the middle of the night and their vacation to say, yes, I'm alive. It seems stupid to them, but we have to do it to make sure that we can rely on that legal document. So another thing to keep in mind, or like people on a cruise, sometimes that can be problematic. Like, when are you gonna be like out of port or whatever, where you can make that phone call or have access to communicate, so planning that. If it's someone that's like, you know, special circumstances, someone's in the military and they're like deployed, we cannot speak to them, there's ways around that, but tell us that's the case, don't tell us the morning of closing, oh yeah, you're not gonna be able to talk to them, they're, who knows, they're somewhere in the Middle East, they're deployed. The morning of closing is not the time to tell us that, because we have to get special approvals for that kind of thing. And we still do need to talk to certain people, like maybe we talk to their commanding officer to say, yes, Johnny's still alive, he's deployed. Okay, that's all we need. Or someone who's in prison. We're probably not gonna be able to talk to them. Maybe we can, but maybe not. So talking to the prison warden, yes, this person is a prisoner here and they're still alive. That kind of thing we can do, but just if it's a weird circumstance, special circumstance, let us know ahead of time so we can get the approvals, so it's smooth sailing on the day of closing. Because I have had it where we had no idea Johnny was in prison, and we tried to do the Aladdin well, and we're like, Johnny's not answering. I'm like, well, of course he's not, he's in prison. Awesome.
Wow. Never a dull moment.
Never, never, but if we had just been told when we did the whole power of attorney, then that would have fixed it. Communication is key.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, always best earlier, as early in the process as you can to know if they're gonna be at closing or not, or why. And then just communicate with that. You don't have to know all the ins and outs about what we do, just call us and be like, hey, this is the situation. What are our options? And we'll tell you.
Yeah. And also your seller, you heard me say this too, when we say, are they attending, and this is true for buyer, we mean, are they attending in our office? Not, are they attending from their kitchen table in Ohio? Because we've had people say that they're attending when that's what they meant, like multiple people, which boggles my mind. Yeah, here we are.
Yeah. Good to know.
Fun fact, here means here.
So one thing I wanted to just kind of talk about this morning was, seller concessions. And I've had a few different, transactions over the past few weeks that had some seller concessions, or they were going back and forth, like during due diligence, on repairs that needed to be done, or maybe repairs they were gonna ask about. For some reason, I'm seeing a lot of sellers recently who like don't wanna do repairs. So they'd rather either give money, lower the price, whatever they wanna do. And that's fine, that's, y'all negotiate that. But just remembering that your buyers, if you're the buyer's agent, if it's like, $10,000 in repairs that they're asking for, whatever that might be. Couple things, if they're just gonna give them 10 grand instead of doing any repairs, totally fine. Just make sure that your ATAC just says seller to contribute $10,000 for closing costs. Don't put the words in lieu of repairs.
And don't put that on an ATAC either. If all
That's what
you're
I-
doing is giving the money, just do a regular amendment. Because when you use the ATAC, that says, hey, there are things I want to change about the house. And then a lot of lenders will see 10,000 and say, oh, clearly that's for repairs, what's the issue? But if you just have a regular amendment, now if you're doing other stuff and doing seller credit, the ATAC is fine. But if all it is seller to get $10,000, just do a regular amendment.
Yes, so leave out the words in lieu of repairs. I had one agent send me that amendment, and that's what it said, and I said, I just sent it back to her, and I was like, hey, can y'all just redo this and take out in lieu of repairs so we don't open a can of worms? She's like, absolutely. So she rewrote it or took that out, and everyone signed it, and she sent me a new one. So we are your filter, so we're looking at those amendments before we're sending them on to the underwriter. So, you know, we're gonna try to catch stuff like that, but obviously it's less work for you if you remember that in the first place. And don't have to.
If you send it to the lender.
Yes,
right?
definitely send it.
Because sometimes if you just send it to the closing attorney and it doesn't go through your loan officer, and then we're coordinating with the lender at the end, and they're like, what is this $10,000 you have? And we say, oh, amendment 2 had that on there, here's the ATAC, we're gonna send it, and we're not like filtering it like your loan officer, because your loan officer is better positioned to know what their underwriter is gonna want, so make sure
Yeah,
that.
because the closing attorney is going to be, when, by the time they're coordinating on the file, they're coordinating with the processor or the closer. So they're just, if they get something, it's going in the file to the underwriter. If I get something, I'm filtering it first. So yes, always send amendments and ATACs to us right away. That way we can just make sure, or if you have questions when you're writing it, call me. So that's the one thing. The other thing is remembering too, like, hey, there's repairs that are 10 grand. They don't want to do them. Hey, you know, should we do 10 grand toward closing costs, or should we lower the price by 10 grand? Because to the seller, both are the same, they net the same amount, it does not matter. To your buyer though, they're gonna benefit a whole lot more from getting money toward closing costs than a lower price. So if you've got a $450,000 house and they're like, hey, we could do 450 and give you 10 grand toward closing costs, or do 440 and nothing toward closing costs. Remember, your buyer's only gonna benefit on their monthly payment if that value is reduced by 10 grand. And it's about $5 to $7 for every 1,000. So if you reduce it 10 grand, you know, if their loan amount's about $10,000 less, they might save them $50, 50 to 60 bucks a month. Versus they don't have to bring $10,000 toward closing, or we can use some of that to buy the rate down even further for them. So there's a lot of things we can do with that 10 grand, whatever money the seller wants to contribute. Remember, there are limits, so depending on what kind of loan they're doing, how much they're putting down, you know, go ahead and call us, talk to the lender before you add a dollar amount into an amendment to address concerns, or just an amendment before you ask for that, because maybe we'll do a combination then. Like, hey, you know, they're willing to give 20 grand, but we can't use all that. That's either over the threshold or something. Well, maybe we can do 12 grand toward closing and reduce the price by 8. You know, they get a little bit of relief there, you know, whatever. So we want to make sure that we're structuring it to where they can use all the money that they're getting, and they're not leaving anything on the table.
And the third option for that is if it really is repairs, like they want all new windows, the seller does not want to replace the windows, like, hey, let me just give you credit for that. The other option is you as the buyer's agent can go get quotes for windows, and then the seller, instead of reducing the price or giving you 10,000 in concessions, can say seller to pay Windows R Us $10,000 at closing. That's not going to factor into your buyer's closing cost limits with the lender at all. So if you have 40,000 worth of repairs and you've got a $400,000 loan, there's no way you're going to be able to utilize all of that if you give it to the buyer by way of concession or price reduction. But if the seller's paying the vendor directly, then that is fine. And there's really no limit on what the seller can pay for at all, other than making sure it's not a sketchy way to give the buyer money. Like if your buyer owns a painting company, your seller can't write a check to buyer's painting company for $20,000 at closing, right? We can't pull proceeds to do that. So lender has to approve it, but that's what they're looking at. But that's a way to get a lot of that done. You just need to know ahead of time so you can get those invoices or get those estimates. And then what we can do is we can cut the check from the seller's proceeds and hand it to the buyer. That way the vendor doesn't get paid until the work is done. Seller's paid for it, buyer has control of it, pays the vendor when it's done. That's an easy way to get all your repairs taken care of.
I like it. And with that, that is different than like a repair escrow that the lender manages. So just remember that. In Ashley's scenario, that's fine. as long as our appraisal is as is. So just remember that, if the appraisal comes back as is and the appraiser's saying, hey, the value is this, the value is 450 with no repairs needed to be done, then that just means that the repairs that you're negotiating are just like desired, or hey, the windows are older, they still work, but we know we're gonna wanna replace it for energy efficiency, whatever. It's not like, hey, the windows are falling out, or the roof is leaking, so we're gonna replace the roof, but we're gonna do it later. Those kinds of things. If there's a problem with the house and it's called out, that has to be done. If it's called out on the appraisal, has to be done before closing. That cannot survive the closing. So just know that if the appraisal's fine, then you do have some wiggle room to do some stuff kind of outside. We don't really care as long as the appraisal's as is. So.
And there are some vendors that will do the work before closing and then allow that payment to occur at closing. Which I think if you have like, what Aaron's talking about with the appraisal and the roof is leaking, I wanna say, and you can verify, but I think Todd is okay getting paid at closing. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, but there are vendors that are okay with that. So it's not so much that it has to necessarily be paid for before closing, it's just the work has to be done before closing, right?
Correct. Yes, the invoice can say to be paid at closing, and that's fine, because for us as a lender, if we've gotta have, say, a new roof put on, then the new roof can be put on before closing, so we can verify it's done, but the invoice for the roofing company can say to be paid at closing, and then we can be told that, and that's fine, we can see that the seller's got the money. I had one actually last month where they were putting on a new roof, and same thing, because the seller was gonna pay for it out of proceeds. So whatever, and that wasn't up here, that was like in Macon area or something, so, then I didn't know any of those vendors. But, they were putting the roof on, basically, once we told them the loan was approved. So they kind of had a little bit, just to make sure, when I pre-approved her, I know it was gonna be, but they wanted to know, hey, the approval's in, it's official, blah, blah, blah. That's when the seller said, okay. So, it could be something like that where you've got vendors, and maybe they're vendors that you have relationships with, so it's probably easier to get one to agree to that if you know them, like maybe Todd or something, versus just randomly calling somebody you've never worked with and being like, hey, can you do the work, and we'll pay you in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So, but there are different things you could do like that. Hey, we've got the official approval, go ahead and schedule the work that week before closing. That works.
And when we're talking about seller concession, maybe not like $30,000 worth of repairs, but let's say you've got, the limit for the loan is $6,000 and the seller was willing to give $7,000, so you're like, oh man, I'm gonna lose $1,000. You can add extra stuff to the buyer side. So as long as, or excuse me, not as far as lender limits go, they're also gonna limit it by the total amount of actual closing costs. So let's say your lender limit is $8,000, but you only have $6,000 worth of costs, but the seller agreed to give you $7,000. So you're below the lender's limit as far as your loan amount goes, but you don't have enough actual cost to eat up the full $7,000. You can tack other stuff on, like if you're not already getting a home warranty, get a home warranty. Get a couple years of home warranty, right? You can tack on extra years. You can pay for the HOA in advance. There's all sorts of things, or maybe your buyer's gonna paint, you weren't gonna ask the seller to paint for you, but now you're gonna get the seller to pay for $1,000 worth of paint because there's an extra $1,000. And the seller doesn't care whether they give a painter $1,000 and the buyer $6,000, or the buyer can, put a line item on the buyer side, $1,000 to Home Depot or whatever, you go buy paint. So you can put extra costs on your buyer side to eat up that seller cost if there's not enough actual cost. That makes sense? So the word cost a lot.
Yeah. Or, we can write on the rate. That's a very common one. Like, our closing costs, closing costs aren't usually $6,000, but I get what you're saying. But yeah. So say it, we're a couple thousand under what your seller has agreed to contribute. So we would look at that and say, all right, hey, we could buy the rate down another $8,000, then that might cost us the extra $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever that is. So we can certainly look at doing that, or in this day and age, we can do the temporary buy downs too. You can do a 1-year temp buy down. I mean, we hear the 2-1 all the time, but there are others. There's a 3-2-1, very expensive because you're doing it for 3 years. There's a 1-0, which is just a 1-year 1 point buy down. So it's kind of like the second year of the 2-1. It's cheaper, right? So remember, the cost of those temporary buy downs is literally whatever the interest savings is for the year. So if you're paying, if you're doing a 2-1 buy down and the current rate's 7.5, so the year one, the buyer's gonna be paying 5.5. Say that means their payment, for easy numbers, say their payment at the 7.5% would be like 2,500. At the 5.5, it would be 2,000. So maybe they're saving $500 a month for year one on their payment. Well, the lender is still going to be getting 2,500. So the buyer's only paying 2,000, that extra 500 per month, so that's 6,000 for that year, is in a little escrow account. The seller's paid that, if the seller's paying for the buy down, and then year two is half, because it's only 1 point lower, so they're saving $250 a month, so that's $3,000 for the year. So it starts with that $9,000, that's the cost for the 2-1 buy down, it goes into a little escrow account. Because all that is prepaid interest that the buyer is now not having to pay for those first 2 years. So the buyer pays their $2,000 a month payment for the first year, and every month $500 comes out of that little escrow account on the side to make a full $2,500 payment go to the lender. And then on year two, they're paying $2,250 now because they're only 1 point lower. And then the other $250 is coming out. So every month for those 24 months where the buyer's paying less than the given rate, the lender is still getting the full payment. So just keep in mind that that's what it is, that they're paying, the cost for the 2-1 buy down is literally whatever the interest savings is over those 2 years. And that money is already collected and it's in an account. So say your buyer gets the 2-1 buy down, they're gonna get dollar for dollar all of that, even if they refi at 18 months. So say rates drop before the end of their 2 years where their temporary buy down is gonna end. They can go ahead and refi. They don't have to wait for that because whatever money is still sitting in that account is still theirs. It's still part of that loan. So it'll go toward their loan payoff basically when they refi. So that's an option too. I know we talked about this on our Friday daily dose call a little bit with the buy downs and stuff like that. So it's a great option for your buyer if the seller's willing to pay that, and they're not gonna lose out if they refi before the end of that term. So just remember that.
Don't have any questions or anything else going on you wanna talk about? We're done. Awesome. Merry Monday. Whoop, whoop. Have a great week, guys. Thanks for coming.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Sandy says, thank you, ladies. I have to run, just show more houses. Who is Sandy? Oh, yeah, her VA.